All right. Good morning, everybody. Can you believe it's the 8th of July already? Wow. It's going by fast. I mean, what's crazy is I go back to work. When do I start back? The 19th of August? I feel like every semester they just roll it back earlier and earlier. Um, what's the 19th? That's not much time. I mean, how many more weeks? And I've only gotten one fishing day in. Yes, I was able to go fishing the other day with the parishioner for the first time since my injury, and that was wonderful. So I'm trying to. I'll go fishing tomorrow, so I won't be here for morning prayers for the next couple days. Um, I got to get the fishing in before I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks left. That's not long at all. Only 6 weeks of summer. Can you believe it? I want to give a shout out to our supporters and contributors who donated today. Our regular contributor Dave flipping $10. Great office hours last night. Absolutely. Those office like we had like a 3.5 hour office hour for the class, and really cool topics. Maybe we could even discuss about. Obviously, there were topics about epistemology, and we were going over something known as perceptual blindness as well, and what's known as blind sight cases, which is a really interesting topic if anybody's heard of that. And they were talking about how beliefs are formed, um, do you different types of beliefs, occurrent beliefs versus dispositional beliefs, and whether you can form a belief without other beliefs, which I was arguing you can't. And one of the issues we're kind of going over is that can sense experience simply produce a belief, or is there inferences from other beliefs? That's really interesting. Jordan tips $10. How do I deal with despondency? Great question. So despondency is, one second. It's a type of we're going to talk about kind of in terms of sight, like where you're looking. Despondency is looking at oneself. And all sins, passions, and captivity are looking away from Christ. And so there's, of course, um, sins where you look at oneself and you puff yourself up. I have pride. But the sin of despondency is where you fall into, you're looking at yourself and away from God, right? And making yourself the kind of judge of yourself and reality. And you fall into despair, or and so the way to get out of despondency is one of the best ways to refocus on Christ is service. To start looking to the other person in your community and serving them. So it's despondency is a type of distraction that gets you to look away, and then you start dwelling on your thoughts. You start making erroneous judgments, and you kind of spiral out, and you lose yourself. You lose your identity, you lose your purpose, and again, you make yourself the judge of what is and what is not. And remember the Pythagorean dictum that unfortunately people live by, that man, the measure of all things, that which is and that which is not. There's an element of that in despondency, is you're making yourself the judge of how things are working. For example, let us not forget, as we say in the prayers, let us not forget that all is sent by you. Teach us to act firmly and wisely in these things without embarrassing others. Give us strength to bear the fatigue of the coming day with all that it shall bring. So what happens is you make yourself the judge of something that's perceived to be bad, and because you're looking away from the judge who is Christ and the arbitrator of what's real, that sustains existence, and who has divine providence over everything, as St. Basil says, O Lord, to make what is evil good. The Lord makes what is bad good. All things work for the good, Scripture says, for those who trust and our Lord Jesus Christ. And so you're unable to see the divine providence even in bad actions, that they're sent, that all things are sent by God, and you fall into despair and despondency. And ultimately, this is exactly what happens to Judas. Despondency will lead to suicide and death, because Judas, what happened with Judas, there was a bad thing. He betrayed our Lord, and then he looked away and looked in at himself, right? And he started making judgments that not even God could forgive me for this. And those thoughts ended up making himself kill himself. And he committed suicide. And so all he had to do is wait 3 days to see that everything, what was bad, even the betrayal, was overcome by God's resurrection, for Jesus Christ's resurrection. And so you have to train yourself to not make judgments. Christ takes the deaf man with the spittle in his hand, puts in his ear, epitah, be open, in Aramaic. Be open, don't make the judgments, and have hope that God can make anything right, and does. He restores everything. And so I'm not going to make a judgment on, is this bad or is this good? Why is this happening to me? I trust in God. Now, how do you, easier said than done. The practicalities of how you do that are small little steps. You start going outside of yourself. And that is called kenosis. And that actually displays the life of God, who pours himself out for the salvation of the world, as we say, St. John Chrysostom says in the liturgy, for us and for the salvation of the world. And so you'll start to come out of despondency when you serve coffee hour, when you serve the poor, when you start doing acts of almsgiving and stuff, you stop thinking it's not about it's not about me. Maybe it's not about me. These bad things. Maybe remember the paralytic. Um, and Christ says, and he saw their faith. So why was the paralytic paralyzed? Maybe it wasn't about him. In fact, it wasn't. It was for the sake of the other, for the salvation of the people. That his healing was for the people. And so you need to get in this kind of mindset where it's not really about me. I have to remind this all the time that, I don't want to go to liturgy, or I don't want to do an extra service, and I don't want to do this. I just tell myself it's not about me. Something bad happens to me. I'm persecuted, it's not about me. It's for the salvation of the world. It's for the other people. And I get this kenotic pouring out, looking out to my brothers. They need help. People need saved. That will change your actual mindset. And after a while, it'll be impossible to be in despondency when you're serving people. And then you begin to have a vision of God. You begin to see through service and almsgiving and working for the other person, pouring your life out for the other person, just as Christ did. You begin to get a vision of God. You begin to see how all these things are working in God's divine providence. And then you can't be in despondency once you see the glory of God working in all things. So, good question. And that's the best way. And it takes time. There's no action that's like, can I just do this prayer and snap out? Can I just do it? No, it's going to take time. And the best way to do it is stop thinking about yourself. And the best way to stop thinking about it is serving other people. Good question. All right, what else do we have going on? Something I was going to say. Yeah, fishing. Can't wait to get back. You know what I was worried about? I used to get this way with surfing too. If you haven't done something for a while, you become distant from the kind of joy that those good things can produce. And I was actually falling into, I remember thinking before I went fishing that I was like, just not super excited to get out and fish. Gotta wake up early, gotta, get the flies, and talking to a parishioner about fishing. I was just like, I don't know, it was just kind of laziness, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do it. So, however, going out the other day, that joy, just the being out in nature. There was this beautiful deer that came. It pondered over the waters and was like, I was like, so good. This is so amazing. And it restored the joy that back in my heart of fly fishing again and being out in nature. That has given me the motivation to like get back out there. And I remember the same thing with surfing too. It's like, let's say it's overcast and foggy and cold. Gotta wake up early. gotta, I had a little bit of a drive. I didn't live on the beach. And I was like, I gotta drive all the way down there and then try to find parking and then get into the cold water. And you're just like, sometimes it was hard to motivate myself. And then you get out and you have some amazing waves or something. And you're just like, yes, that's gives you the kind of inspiration. So thank God that he restored that joy back in me. Let's see. I want to see if maybe we can find a video. On this issue of Blindside. Maybe I'll just talk about these issues about beliefs. A lot of this relates to, I wish I could find the article too. There was an article by Donald Davidson about whether animals have beliefs. Let me see if I can find. Oh, I'll have to sign back in. Shoot. Let's see if this works. To JSTOR. Come on. This was conversations that came up about, whether animals are rational. The fact this even has to be debated, it's ridiculous. But okay, I think I found it. This might be it. Well, obviously, to be rational, you have to have beliefs and by the way, beliefs alone wouldn't constitute rationality. But a kind of more fundamental would be, well, do animals even have beliefs? Let me see if I can find the quote from Donald Davidson. Here. Yes, found it. Found it. All right. I'm gonna move this over here so I have it present before we'll talk about this. So this is within the context of obviously the question, do animals have belief? So Norman Malcolm tells a story which is intended to show that dogs think. Now, I certainly would say that animals have cognition. They can think. They have memory. They retrieval of memories. There's some sort of discursive thinking and connection among other memories. They're actually conscious. That means they're aware of their experiences, what it's like. Higher animals even have self-awareness. But are they rational? Is the sort of thinking they do rational? Well, at bare minimum, they would have to have beliefs. So let's consider whether animals have beliefs. Suppose our dog is chasing a neighbor's cat. The latter runs full tilt toward an oak tree, but suddenly swerves at the last moment and disappears up a nearby maple. The dog doesn't see this maneuver on arriving at the oak tree. He rears up on his hind feet, paws at the trunk, as if trying to scale it, and barks excitedly at the branches above. We who observe this whole episode from the window say, he thinks that the cat went up the oak tree. So we're going to analyze, well, what does that mean? That he thinks the cat went up the oak tree. And Davidson gives a preliminary argument designed to put Malcolm's claim in doubt. So he's going to say, it's not... There's a sort of anthropomorphization when we say that. We often do that. We attribute things because it looks similar. There's similarities. These anthropomorphic words, thinks, believes, knows. He knows that, the food's going to... But when we analyze these terms, it seems impossible or incorrect to actually attribute these terms to. It's clear the evidence for the dog's, quote, beliefs depends on taking belief as a determinant of action or emotional response. That he runs where he does because of this desire and a belief about where the cat has gone. And that he is venting his frustration at not being able to follow the cat up the tree, blah, blah, blah. The details do not need to be right, of course. The point is so far obvious. If we're justified in inferring beliefs, we're justified in inferring intentions and desires. But how about the dog's supposed belief that the cat went up the oak tree? The oak tree, as it happens, is the oldest tree in sight. Does the dog think that the cat went up the oldest tree in sight? Or that the cat went up the same tree it went up last time the dog chased it? It's hard to make sense of the questions. But then it does not seem possible to distinguish between quite different things. The dog might have be said to have believed. One way of telling that we're attributing propositional attitude is by noting that sentences we use to do the attributing may change from true to false if, in the words that pick out the object of the attitude, we substitute for some referring expression another expression that refers to the same thing. The belief that the cat went up the oak tree is not the same belief as the belief that the cat went up the oldest tree in sight. So interesting enough, this has to do kind of with stuff that I was discussing on theories of reference in the debate. If we use the words like believe, think, intend while dropping the feature of semantic opacity, some semantic opacity is the sense or in which you refer. Right? That's why Don Davis says, can we substitute that with the belief that it's the oldest oak tree in sight, because that establishes a reference under a different sense. So let's see what happens when we take that out, the sense, using those words to attribute propositions. Okay, for it has long been recognized that semantic opacity distinguishes talk about propositional attitudes from talk about other things. Some may suggest that the proposition occupied by the expression that oak tree in the sentence, the dog thinks the cat went up that oak tree, is, in Quine's terminology, transparent. The right way to put the dog's belief, the suggestion continues, is the dog thinks with respect to that oak tree that the cat went up it, or that the oak tree is the one the dog thinks the cat went up. But such construction, so what he's trying to do is salvage, like steelman the argument that the dog could have a belief. Okay, well, so it doesn't have this kind of notion of semantic opacity and kind of the sense or guise that it's represented. But can the dog still have refer to, right? And because beliefs nevertheless still have intentionality. Or as a propositional kind of attitude, so you can think about the oak tree. So he tries to steelman it and then go, okay, well, at bare minimum, it would be the dog thinks with respect to the oak tree. Think something. That the cat went up it. That oak tree is the one the dog thinks the cat went up. But such constructions, now he's going to start questioning that and going, look, this seems to be problematic. To produce a description of the object that the believer would accept, nevertheless imply that there is some description. A de re description picks out an object. So you don't just think something, you think it under or with a description, is basically what's saying. And Sellers talked about this too. People don't just see something, they see something as. So even sense experience and perception requires a sense in which it's thought, a representation, a concept, or something like that. And obviously belief is even more so, that to have a belief about something is to believe it under some description. That the cat went up the tree. But what kind of description would suit the dog? That's what we got to think about. So we might want to say the dog thinks with respect to an oak tree, but in order to do that or have a belief, there's some description that the dog thinks such that it picks out the object. What would that mean for an animal? The dog must believe under some description of the tree that the cat went up the tree. Okay, but what does that mean? For example, can the dog believe of an object that it's a tree? This would seem impossible unless we suppose the dog has many general beliefs about trees. So to have a belief about this particular tree, the cat went up it, entails other general beliefs about trees, what a tree is, etc. That they're growing things, they need soil and water, that they have leaves and needles that they burn. There is no fixed list of things someone with the concept of a tree must believe. But without many general beliefs, there would be no reason to identify a belief as a belief about a tree. Do you see what's the argument here is that, and this goes back to a question that was asked yesterday, the day before. Can you have an isolated belief? Can you form a belief without inferences from other beliefs? And this is what Donald Davidson's saying. That doesn't even make sense. You can't have a sense experience and then form a belief. Because to have a belief about something, about trees, for example, this tree, implies you have a bunch of general beliefs about trees, needles, color, soil, etc. There would be no reason to identify a belief as a belief about a tree, much less an oak tree. And then I think he goes on. And if you even ascribe that, be like, oh, the dog has it, then if we can really intelligently ascribe a single belief to a God, we must be able to imagine how we would decide whether the dog has many other beliefs about the kind of necessary for making sense of the first. It seems to me that no matter where we start, we very soon come to beliefs such that we have no idea at all how to tell a dog has them. Yet such that without them, our confident first attribution looks shaky. Yeah, that the dog thinks or believes the cat went up the tree. All right, any questions about that before we move on? Let me go to the... Phil and the Wolf donates £1. Thank you so much. Let's see if we have any. All right, does everybody follow the argument so far? So this is all in support that they don't have belief. This is an anthropomorphization. They have some sort of cognitive activity, right? They can discriminate, they have memory and stuff like that. It doesn't make any sense to say the dog thinks the cat went up the tree, because that implies beliefs about the tree, the particular tree, but to have a belief about the particular tree is have a whole host of other beliefs about what trees are, etc. Does that make sense? I mean, just like obviously, the you don't need to get the details of what a dog would actually do for it to work. Like you could substitute it with. So people always get the philosophical examples. They're like, well, that wouldn't happen. It's like, okay, it doesn't. It kind of misses the point. Um, the general point is, could you imagine kind of generally something like that happening? The details of it is that are relevant, so don't get distracted by like the minutia or something like that the dog would, because that would be irrelevant. The fact of the matter is just to set up a scenario in which you could see somebody saying, oh, look, the dog thinks the food's there or something, that the cat, like something like that. Like, obviously people talk that way. Envision whatever example and details that you want to make that work, so that we can then analyze what does it mean to say the dog thinks or has a belief that's directed towards whatever object that's about that object. All right. Here's another thing I want to go over. From Bonjour. And it's a reference to Donald Davidson. Right, so I think it's in Coherentism. Remember, the original question is, can I have a belief or even formulate a belief apart from other beliefs? Or are all beliefs what they are because they're dependent upon other beliefs? There's inferences, they hang on, right? And so somebody's example is that, well, can't human beings formulate a new belief that isn't an inference or connected to other beliefs? They're having a sense experience about a tree. And Davidson et al. Are going to argue, no, all beliefs require other beliefs, either inferentially or in the sense of kind of dependence, which is exactly what you see with Donald Davidson. To have a particular belief means that it's couched within the structure of a whole bunch of other beliefs, general beliefs about trees, colors, soil, etc. Okay, are you following me on this? It depends on what you mean by thought. I think it's perfectly fine to say cognition. But again, to say the dog thinks, so if that's what you mean by thought, it means it thinks it under a idea or concept or belief. Then you have to be like, okay, well, can I have a particular belief about a tree? Well, particular belief entails a whole bunch of other beliefs. Okay, so no, it's incorrect, strictly speaking, to say the dog thinks. It has cognitive activity, but if it doesn't have beliefs, it's not proper to actually say it thinks. So again, it's about being precise with these words. What do we mean by think, believe, etc.? Now, if it can't have a belief, then it certainly can't be rational, right? Because rationality entails beliefs, concepts, inferences, etc. All right, moving on. No other questions on. I just want to figure out if you're following me on what the argument is. So one way out is to deny that you could have a sense experience that forms a belief. And the belief's about the sense, the content, sense content. Okay, and we're going to look over arguments that seems to be impossible too. So you can't actually say dogs or animals think or have beliefs, let alone rational. That's the argument. Okay, moving on. So one way out again is to say that you could formulate a single belief from a sense experience rather than other beliefs. Okay, let's look at this. For humans, and if it's possible for humans, then it may be possible for animals. Okay. Here's a question about, he's questioning this is Bonjour, the whole idea that sensory experience could justify beliefs, let alone form them, and whether that makes any intelligible sense. The starting point of the argument is the view that distinctive content, sensory, so distinctive means distinct categories. If you look at sense experience, right, the sensory content that out there, there's something you notice about it. It's not propositional. It's non-propositional. Well, what does a proposition mean? A proposition is a sentence, call them statements, that has a possible truth value. Because we have all kinds of sentences like, is it cold outside, is not a proposition. Because there's no way to say true or false. Look out, there's somebody at the door. That's not a proposition either because it doesn't have a possible truth value. So, okay. So that's what we mean by propositional. So it's non-conceptual. So propositions and concepts belong to the mind. In other words, it doesn't make any sense to be like, I was walking outside and I tripped over a proposition and I fell into a concept, right? Why? Because the material world of sense content is non-propositional, non-conceptual. Okay, does everybody follow me on that? We have to get these terms down. Oops. All right. There may be no fixed list of beliefs on which particular thought depends. Nevertheless, much true belief is necessary. Some beliefs of the sort required are general, but plausibly empirical, such as cats can scratch or climb trees. Others are particular, such the cat seen running a moment ago is still in the neighborhood. Some are logical. Thoughts, like propositions, have logical relations. This will be another argument to you that obviously animals don't have this. Since the identity of a thought cannot be divorced from its place in the logical network of other thoughts. It cannot be relocated in a network without becoming a different thought. That's a great point. In other words, thoughts don't exist in isolation. Just as we saw with Donald Davidson, a thought or a belief is connected to, if you ask, well, what does that mean? It's connected to a whole bunch of other beliefs. And if I switch it out of that structural network, it switches the very meaning of the term. It's no longer the same thought. Radical incoherence in a belief is therefore impossible. Okay, to have a single propositional attitude is to have a... Oh, wait, I'm in the wrong. Excuse me, I want to go back to this. That's still relevant. But anyways, okay, let's go back to a human being having an actual sensory experience and whether they can formulate a belief from that or if it entails and implies other beliefs. So here's a human being looking out their window. There are many trees of different kinds. Notice that all our examples are trees and animals. There are many trees of different kinds, at least partially in my field of view, and what I experience might be described as a variegated field of mostly green with small patches of brown and gray and other colors with many, many different shades and shapes, all changing in complicated and subtle ways as the wind blows or clouds move by. Given some time and close attention, I could arrive at many, many propositional conceptual judgments about what I'm experiencing. That one patch is larger than the other. That one shape is similar to or different from another. The particular patch is brighter than the one that was there a moment earlier. The very specific colors for which I learned names are present, and on and on. But the most fundamental experience of the sensory content itself does not seem to be a proposition or conceptual in this way. It's not primarily consciousness that the experiential content falls under general categories or universals. The experienced sensory content is what the general or classificatory judgments are about. Okay, so there's no concepts or propositions out there. That's he's saying there's a confusion, category confusion here. Category. No, the universals or categories or beliefs or judgments are what those judgments are about. The experienced sensory content is what these general classifications are about and makes them true or false. But the sensory content itself is very different, actually, from and vastly more specific than the various conceptual characterizations, in a way that makes it extremely doubtful that it could ever be fully described in conceptual terms. Think very carefully about this difficult point. Consider lots of examples which are fortunately very easy to come by. Imagine trying to describe such an experienced sensory content to someone else, or perhaps over the phone. One problem is that our vocabulary in this area obviously is very inadequate. We have words for general ranges of colors and shapes, but not for fully specific instances. I won't cover them all. But even if you did have an adequate vocabulary, isn't it clear that it would be very, very difficult to actually give anything close to a complete description? And the real point, the sensory content of which you are conscious and which you are attempting to describe does not itself already involve or consist of conceptual classification. Description. All right. The argument that now is going to be developed is you have an incommensurability because you have opposite categories. You have sense experience that is non-propositional, non-doxaxic. Dox, I mean belief. They're not beliefs. They're what beliefs are about. They're not propositional. They're what the propositions are about. They're non-conceptual. It's what concepts are about. So you have opposite categories, and you can't relate opposites unless you have a mean proportion by which you can relate the two. This is what creates the mind-body problem that Descartes sets us up with, that if you define bodies, material bodies, with opposite properties than mind, then the two can't be related, let alone ontologically exist. But I can't even say one can cause the other. This is the mind-body problem. If you define material bodies is non-intentional, third-person objective, exist, extended through space, operates by the causal laws of physics, can be described by microphysics, etc. And then be like, well, what's mind? Well, just everything the opposite of that. Intentional, first-person, private, subjective, not extended in space, not described by causal laws of physics and stuff like that. Then you have what? Well, then how can mind cause the opposite category? That's the mind-body problem. So we have something similar here is how can sense experience cause or form beliefs, let alone justify them? They can't. Because they're opposite categories. And if that's not possible for humans, then right, your beliefs cause and form other beliefs. And so you can't have a belief apart from being caused by other beliefs and within the whole logical structure of beliefs, and clearly animals aren't doing that. Okay. Remember, if the issue we're at present concerns is whether sensories can justify a belief, and we'll go even more modest, even form a belief. But if the sensory experience is in no way conceptual, and given that beliefs are formulated in propositional conceptual, it becomes hard to see how. That's the question. Well, how would you do it? Well, it just happens, right? No. How can something that is not even formulated in conceptual terms be a reason for thinking that something that is thus formed is true? Great point. The present line of argument concludes that there can be no such justificatory relation. Exactly. There's only apparently alternative that the relation between sense experience and beliefs must be causal. Okay, here's a quote from Donald Day. The relation between sensation and a belief cannot be logical, since sensations are not beliefs or propositional attitudes. That is, are not formulated in conceptual terms. What is then the relation? The answer is, I think, obvious. The relation's causal. Sensations cause some beliefs, and in this sense are the basis of grounded beliefs, but a causal explanation of belief does not show how or why that it's justified. In other words, even if we say that, and he'll go into the problems of, like, how can it even cause it or something like that, but we certainly want to assume that the sense world is affecting us in some way, but it wouldn't be a sufficient condition. It would at best be necessary, right? Does everybody follow me on this? I know this is kind of difficult, but am I losing you guys? Am I losing interest? Yeah, Dave, the flipping does $5. Office hours continue. Yeah, it's a great topic. All right, repeat back to me the argument. That's what I always do to my students. They're like, oh, I get it, Mike. Oh, really? Okay. Repeat back what we just said. Okay, where's the next point I want to go with this? So, the argument would be, if I formulated an argument. By the way, do you know what a fortiori in Latin means? Even more so. So typically what you do this is you go to an example. We went to human beings. Human beings cannot justify beliefs by non-beliefs. Really, this is a critique of empiricism. They're in opposite categories, and so I can't actually relate. And so this is argument that coherentists bring up. I'm not advocating coherentism. I'm looking at different things that have critiques of a position, be like, yeah, that's actually a good argument. Doesn't mean I'm a coherentist, but what the coherentist is going to say is that beliefs are not formed or justified by non-beliefs. Only a belief can be a reason for another belief, because beliefs are reasons. Non-reason, non-beliefs obviously can't. That's Davidson's argument. I'm going to move. Furthermore, if that's the true, coherentism is critiquing foundationalism. I'll pull it up here. That the structure of reasons and beliefs is not linear. Okay. That they all cohere together as a whole. And I think that's... So inference isn't just made like, well, I'm for this belief, from this belief, from this belief, right? And all of that would go back down to a foundation. And the problem that the coherentist is going to say is that, well, there's two types of foundationalism. Classical foundationalism of like Descartes' rationalism, that you have this kind of indubitable self-presenting clear and distinct idea that's a thought that's not dependent upon the empirical world. Okay, that's classical foundationalism of Descartes. Then you have the empiricist variety that, well, then beliefs rest on a single foundation of empirical sense, experience, data, content. And that was one of the critiques here, is that, well, non-conceptual, non-logical, non-doxaxic content can never be a justification for doxaxic beliefs, logic, etc. Okay. The further thing, too, then, is the critique of foundationalism. Okay, so beliefs depend on or formed from other beliefs. There's inferential relations. Inference is always between beliefs, so it can't be an inference from something that's not a belief. So, but that doesn't rule out a linear structure of inference. So coherentism makes another argument, like critiquing foundationalism. The very structure of inference is not linear. That's where we're at so far. Yeah, that's a good question too. Is there a first belief? This gets really complicated. If there's a first belief, then we're back into the same problem. Then I formed a belief from, or justified a belief from something that's not a belief, which can never make an inference from something that's not a belief. Typically what happens is, I think it's what's called like language entry. So what happens is a child starts to develop like a language entry, right? By imitating words and stuff like this. But that's only because the child can only do that if there's a fixed structure, right, in society of language that's normative. So what happens is we could say that the infant doesn't have beliefs yet, right? And as it starts to do a language entry, it doesn't have beliefs. When it said dada, right? They don't have a belief about dad, right? They're like animal cognition. But what they're doing is they're imitating. And they're following through imitation the rules of a logical language that's a whole, right? And as they start to enter, they start to then come into the language game. And as they start to work the language, beliefs, and I don't think there's ever a first belief, they start to, do you see how that's all kind of working? Because the words that we use, that we actually have beliefs, already are cohering together. So when they begin to imitate it, right, and begin to formulate concepts, it starts to come as wholes rather than a part. So when they do get a first belief, it's because they have multiple beliefs now because they've done the language entry. Would be their argument. Sellers, Davidson, etc. But yeah, great. Otherwise, we're right back into the same problem. Okay, ready? And David, this is great too because I was telling David that had a recorded lecture on coherentism. It was like one of the best lectures I had given, and I forgot to record it. So now you're getting not only 3.5 hours of class from yesterday, you're getting another full lecture on coherentism. So I'm making up for my losses. The fundamental idea of coherence is simple enough, even given the objections just considered the foundation. The basic thrust of the objections is that there is no way for conceptual propositional beliefs to be justified by appeal to non-conceptual, non-propositional sensory experience. Right. Moreover, a fairly obvious generalization of those arguments would apparently show that there's no way for beliefs to be justified by appealing to anything that is non-conceptual, non-propositional, or non-beliefs, right, in character. For again, there will be no basis for any sort of inference from something of this character, i.e. non-beliefs, the opposite category, to the other opposite category, right, beliefs. Indeed, since only beliefs or states enough like beliefs to make no difference can stand in inferential relations, that's what I just said, inferences are only between beliefs. You can't make an inference to a belief from a non-belief. It truly seems to essentially involve an inference of some sort of from the reason to the claim in question. The apparent result is that beliefs can only be justified by other beliefs. The central claim of coherentism is that the whole basis for epistemic justification is relation among beliefs. Now, we'll see there's a problem with this too, so that's why I'm not advocating coherentism. The fact of the matter is they bring up a good argument against foundationalism doesn't mean, well, therefore coherentism is true. It means it could be a valid objection. It's just like skepticism too. Skepticism makes a critique, like global skepticism, that's a negative argument, but they don't offer a positive account, so it doesn't mean that there is any positive position that the global skeptic has, that therefore, because excuse me, their objections might be valid in certain respects, justified, it doesn't mean they have anything to offer, therefore, because they bring up a good argument. Right? Some similar is like that going on with coherentism. More specifically, it's alleged what justified beliefs is the way they fit together. The fact that they cohere with it. Okay. Let's go on. Here's just a qualification. By coherence, we don't mean that beliefs don't logically contradict each other. And this is an example. Consider the set of, because they have to be related, logically related. So coherence means they're logically related, not just that there's logical consistency, i.e. they don't contradict each other. Consider a set of entirely unrelated beliefs. The belief that grass is green, the belief today is Tuesday, the belief that Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, and the belief that Matisse was a great painter. The set of beliefs is obviously consistent. They don't contradict each other. Simply because the members make no contact with each other. But it could be odd or misleading to describe it as coherent, or perhaps so odd or to suggest this mere lack of conflict provides real justification. So, by the way, when we make critiques, it can be like, your paradigm's is not coherent. Well, obviously contradiction's enough to show it's not coherent, but simply putting a bunch of stuff together that doesn't contradict is not coherence, and therefore can't be a justification for any of the claims within a system or religion. Coherence is a much stronger, more demanding relation among beliefs. In my relation of virtue, which the coherent set of beliefs will be tightly unified and structured, not a mere assemblage of unrelated items. That's why I always argue, we're arguing for a whole paradigm here. So I can't pull out, and this actually came up recently too. Any particular thing, there's a guy trying to defend iconoclasm, and obviously he was like, well, where's the evidence in the first 2 centuries and stuff like that? Well, first of all, evidence doesn't exist is an arbitrary assertion. Well, it has to be a writing from the guy that I say at a particular time. Evidence doesn't exist even individually, but the whole. I'm like, the evidence is all of orthodoxy. It is, right, the oral teachings and the like you would learn those things by living a life. You can't be outside a family and be like, well, where's the evidence of the recipe if it wasn't written? It's like, well, the evidence is inside. Like, it's the whole life that, like, if you lived in the family, you would know that's how they cook things. You can't come in with an arbitrary thing outside a family and be like, I demand this, that this has to be shown. And this is similar with orthodoxy too. It's the life lived and the traditions passed on orally, right? An oral teaching precedes written. Part of it's written. It's the consensus of the fathers. It's the testimony of the historians like Eusebius. It is the lives of the saints, the martyrs. It is the episcopacy. It is the synodality, the councils, right, that confirm the faith of the fathers, the faith that established the universe. It's normative authority, that there's a legal authority to bind, right? It's the scriptures. Now, I take all of those are just necessary conditions. It's only when I take the whole together, the Catholicity, the kataholos, that it becomes a necessary and sufficient condition for any one of the parts. That is the evidence. You take any one of those, like scripture or a writing of the Father, it can't be evidence and justification, right? It only exists very much like this. They don't exist individually, right? It's not only that they're not contradicting, but they're tightly unified. Each and every aspect of the Orthodox Church and the beliefs and the rules and the history and the testimonies, oral and written, the scriptures, are all tightly unified and structured together. They're not unrelated items. And that's why there's an element that the Coherence is saying that it's like, well, Orthodox kind of operates like that. Because otherwise it would be like that, to take exactly what we're saying. I believe, or this guy's claim of where's the evidence, right? As a single isolated belief. But it's like, okay, well, how do you justify that belief? What's the inference? From a non-belief? And if it's a belief entails a whole host of other beliefs, general and particular and stuff like that. So it can't be a belief, let alone a justification for that belief taken out of the whole. And that's what this says. The idea is that the members, or those things I said, of a coherent system of beliefs stand in fairly pervasive inferential relation of the sort to each other, with the degree of coherence depending on the degree to which this is so, that is, on the number of strength of the inferential connections. All right. Questions about that so far? Snow Cookies, $5. According to Agrippa's trilemma, would tag argument be considered transcendent? No. So the whole point is to get you away from systems, right? Again, just because it's like you're using a transcendental deduction doesn't mean that it's actually, well, that's Kantian transcendental arguments. Just because we say, well, God's the foundation, doesn't mean that we're foundationalists. Just because we say the beliefs cohere together in the way we're saying doesn't make you a coherentist. Again, I really want to push away from that you start with any isms and systems and be like, is it this? No, it's above. It's actually denying that any of those systems could actually, or that it could fit in that. Now, as St. Demetrius Stanley says, because it transcends any systems or philosophies, right? Because it's autonomous, it's literally the negation of all those systems. It stands above. It's supernatural. It's not an autonomous system. Because it transcends, exists over and above, you can find elements and say, well, yeah, I mean, God does serve as a type of foundation, but that's not foundationalism. Furthermore, as Bonjour had pointed out, and Donald Davidson, any word or belief taken outside and changed in the kind of mosaic of all the other beliefs becomes a different belief. So that's why you can't say tag is a transcendental foundationalism. Is because transcendental foundationalism means something in the context of a whole host of beliefs. That's not what orthodoxy is. So when I take that out and if I use that word, if I said, okay, transcendental foundationalism, then it would be like, well, it's not anything like how we use the word transcendental foundationalism. That's the point. Good question, though. And then the other problem, too, is then you've, like you said, well, then you've got Agrippa's trilemma. The only way out of Agrippa's trilemma is twofold. Radical skepticism or a radically different way of approaching knowledge. The radical different way would be the antithesis of all the three positions. By saying, not this. And it's not, because it'd be like, well, what is it in terms of a system? It's like, that's what it's negating, is a system wouldn't be able to answer that. There has to be something that stands beyond that, right? And that's why I call it the app. Well, what is it? I don't have to tell you what it is to say that it is. And that's just a principle of knowledge that we all know. That there's something outside. In order for that belief to be true, I don't have to answer, well, what is it? Like, I don't know. I have to, you find out the what after. And in this case, if it's apophatic, there is no comprehension of the transcendent, inner life of God. All right, moving on. I don't like the word axioms because axioms are not justified in themselves. Like, you can't justify an axiom. And you have arbitrariness, right? So it's just like it has a pragmatic use or something like that, but there's no justification for axioms. So, all right, moving on. This is where I want to get to. A response to epistemic regress problem. So this does kind of relate to Agrippa's trilemma. And every system has axioms. So that's why I said there's only two ways out of the Agrippa's trilemma. To become a radical Pyrrhenian skeptic, which, by the way, is, guess who Agrippa is? He's the Pyrrhenian school. So there's no positive position at all. There's no axioms. I'm not making any claims. I'm defeated. Or, well, there's got to be a radically different way, an theonomous way. That's literally the negation of the other way, and that's apophatic. Because if you were like, well, you got to describe it in the system, it's like, well, then you're back into the other category. That's why I put it in a radical disjunct. So, remember, with the Agrippa's trilemma, either your things are arbitrary, and you have no justification. It's an infinite regress, or it's a circle. Right, it's just, you eventually come back to the principle or axiom that's the thing in question itself. So, remember, foundationalism's offered as a solution to that. But unfortunately, the thing that it's trying to avoid circularity, infinite regress, ends up I'm trying to remember the Italian philosopher I mentioned out, ends up, and vice versa, actually ends up with coherentism, ends up becoming the thing that it wants to negate. Okay. Coherence is going to say, well, inferential justification is a circle or loop back onto itself rather than ending in unjustified beliefs going on infinitely or terminating with foundational beliefs. Advocates of coherence occasionally claim that such a view is acceptable as long as circles and loops are large enough and complicated enough. Interesting. So what they're trying to do is get out of premise circularity. So, begging the question where fallacy, informed fallacy, weak induction, the inference is not strong enough. If I simply restate my conclusion as one of the premises support for the conclusion, then I'm just going in an immediate circle. And so the problem, as we talked about, is circle phobia. It's not that circles are bad, it's is it enough to establish? Well, simply just taking the conclusion that you want to prove and be like, what's the support for that? And be like, well, my premise is a support. What's the premise? Well, my conclusion just slightly stated differently. It's like, well, then you have one only inferential relation that's not enough. It's not enough stronger support. So the intuition of the coherentist is like, yeah, because there's a lot more beliefs all strung together. So the problem isn't just circularity. It needs to be big enough that it does the work. That's what now the question is going to be like, well, how big does it have to be? Right? Generally, it's like, yeah, if you got more beliefs in there that all kind of mutually support, I can see how it's sort of like a structure of a house, right? The thing can't, if it's just one inference, and 2, the thing that it's itself, obviously that's not a big enough structure. What about 5? It's like probably not. But if they all hinge together in a big enough structure of inferences, yeah, you could have a building. I think the coherentists is thinking, but I mean, who knows? Like, well, how big does that have to be? It's not like something actually build outside like a physical building and be like, well, that failed. We need more supports in there. So that's kind of difficult with. So generally, it's like we can see the kind of force that we're like, yeah, I generally kind of see. But again, with all these autonomous philosophies, it's the details that matter. It's like 19th century British idealist Bernard Bosanquet offers a solution to the regress from it. It amounts to the claim that the very formulation of the problem depends on a basic mistake concerning the structure of inference. Or inferential justification. The mistaken idea that relations or inferential justification fundamentally involve a one-dimensional asymmetric linear order, dependence among the other beliefs in question. Once this linear picture is accepted, it's argued that the regressive justification is unavoidable and can be solved only allegedly untenable, only in the foundationless way. Bosanquet's contrary suggestion is that inferential justification, when properly studied, is ultimately non-linear. It's holistic in character, with all the beliefs involved staying in relations of mutual support, but none being justificationally prior to others. In this way, it's alleged any objectionable circularity is avoided. So again, the problem is it's not circles. Is the circle strong enough? And you get enough in there, mutually supporting beliefs, just like things in a building. It's like, yeah, like theoretically, yes, that's ultimately it kind of comes back on each other. But that's again, the problem isn't circles itself; it's strength. Can something be strong enough to justify? Okay, do you follow me on that? Because then we're gonna take and come back to. And by the way, so once you get somebody to accept radical skepticism, they've abandoned the notion of justification for anything. So, which applies to skepticism itself. So they're basically saying, I'm going to be non-rational. And skepticism then can't be a challenge to orthodoxy because they abandon what? That it's a justification or an art, like they've abandoned arguments. So in some sense, that's exactly where Tag wants to give it. Like, yeah, you can't say that our position is not true, and somebody can't be, well, I'm doing an internal critique. Like, there's no justification for internal critiques. This might as well just be like, well, I'm doing blah, and just barf out some verbal diarrhea. It's like, yeah, they made a noise. Like, a noise is not an argument. It's not a critique. So that's exactly where we want somebody. It's like, that's not a win for them. It's a win for us. It's like, congratulations. We defended orthodoxy. So there's only one other way to go. If you want to be rational, if you want to have reasons and justifications for various beliefs and even actions, there's only one other way to go. Yeah, people always think that, like, oh, I got him because I became a skeptic. It's like, no, you actually lost. It means I'm not playing anymore. Like, I'm no longer engaged in civil, rational society. They have been banished, right? The person banished from the town is not a win. It's like, they're the loser, right? like, congratulations, you. May God have mercy on your soul. Who's Danny? Oh, Danny. Oh, is that what Trent? Is Danny the Skittles liberal? Like, that's a state, like, now you're teaming up with Gaytheist in order to prove your position and argue against me. You actually have to team up with Gaytheist. Like, congrats. Like, just double down on the losses over and over. No, I didn't, but I'm addressing the thing about, because it got me to think about, I mean, in some sense I don't need to look at the wood passage or something like that. So I'm glad you brought that up. Wood, maybe I'll get, just pull it out. Wood may be a foundationalist. That might be the problem. I don't know exactly what Wood's. So all of this is arguments that you couldn't form a belief or a new belief without having other belief. Then the question I think Zane had asked was, well, are you aware of it? And this is the answer. You're not aware of every single belief that it logically entails and hinges on. I mean, who knows how many beliefs that we have? Like, however, when you have a belief that the tree is green, immediately present to you are at least a couple other beliefs. That's what Bonjour and Donald David said, like a belief about trees, soil, and stuff like that. And the degree at which you're attending to it can vary. I can hyper focus on and be like, I'm gonna think about like treeness and soil and stuff like that. But it's like a picture with all the details. It's present before your awareness and conscious. And obviously there's a whole background that's not, of which you could then pull up into the picture and stuff like that and be like, okay. But it's impossible, the argument is to simply have an isolated belief in which you're not aware of other beliefs, right? At all. That they're just totally in the background. And the reason, and David Wood had said, well, you don't have to rehearse, what was your inferences when you come to a belief. That itself, I realized, I'm like, that's the critique. It's exactly what he's falling into the problem right here. He's already assumed the thing in question, that the structure of beliefs and inference and justification is linear. In that case, you would have to go through each and every... The argument from the coherentists is it's holistic. Okay? And so a belief can't stand in a linear thing like that of justification, but the whole structure. So very least, again, you have occurrent beliefs, which are called up to your mind. And the way that I like to actually represent that, oh, look what I just found. Reserved clergy. This argument is reserved for clergy. I don't know where this is from. This must have been from the conference. All right, everybody that's not clergy, leave the room. This is arguments reserved for clergy. Well, I need to find another piece of paper. All right, let's do this. Let's get this Orthodox Montana pen here. It's a nice pen. It's a... Do you remember Wolf of Wall Street? Sell me this pen. Oh, it's a nice... It's I think the guy was Australian. It's a black pen. It's really nice. Yeah. It's a pen that's in my hand. All right. This is the Montana pen. All right. I'm going to draw the belief B1. That is, the tree in front of me is green. Okay. B2, B3. Okay, so B1 is the belief that the tree in front of me is green. Okay, what did Donald Davidson and Bonjour say? Well, that belief itself implies other beliefs about trees in general. Okay? About soil and these different things. This larger circle, things that are green. Okay? Now, I'm also going to say there's kind of other faint kind of circles, and then behind this, like all kinds of other circles that are in the background that aren't present. So my argument is when you think a belief, not only is it dependent on other beliefs, the belief itself presents inferential relations with other beliefs. Okay? So although it presents in your sensory experience, right, or let's say your belief about it is about, presents an immediacy as a whole like that, there is a logical inferential relation, right, that may happen really fast, but again, what does this mean? This belongs to this belief or class that belongs to this. Okay? Such that it's a tree that's green. Okay? And so you made an inference. Temporally, too. Not only logically, but temporally. Oh, yeah, I see it. The conclude, like, how that follows. Okay? Now, it's present before my awareness and consciousness. It's an occurrent belief. This occurrent belief brings in at least 3 other occurrent beliefs, but not linearly. It wasn't like I went, right, this, I had to go from, think about this. This is what Wood was saying, it seems ridiculous that I don't do this, and therefore I could just have belief without having before my mind or conscious other belief. That's not right. No, they're actually present right there before you. Right? Not in a linear fashion, but a structure and a whole. Now, I may be vaguely aware, but it's occurrent. Fact of the matter is, there's no belief that could be a belief of which you're not aware of other beliefs, right? So the question is, to what degree am I aware of it? Well, that varies. That's the thing about consciousness, is it's like, well, I can generally kind of see that, right? And therefore there's an inference from the other beliefs that become occurrent in my conscious experience. I can focus on that and be like, huh. I can zoom in and be like, trees, and think about, and even pull out different classes, right? When I think about green, I can focus on that. But it seems absurd to be like that this B1, the tree in front of me is green, operates like that. That it just presents itself as an isolated individual to your conscious mind. Absolutely not. That's what I'm arguing. So what is the problem then? Why does it seem weird? Is because you're thinking about it in a linear fashion. And also, it's this kind of black and white thinking that things are either not conscious, you're not aware of, or you're aware of. But that's not how it works. Consciousness comes in degrees. It's not an either or, right? When it comes to being aware of your belief and other beliefs. It's degrees. So that's a second mistake too, is to be like, well, it's just either you're either just totally unaware of the other beliefs, or... Does that make sense? So that answers the wood objection. It's incorrect to actually say, of course we don't rehearse the inferences and stuff like that. It's like, well, we're not linearly thinking about, right? We're thinking about this in a holistic, right? And it ignores the nuances of consciousness as well. So that's how this stuff actually came up. So thank you for your question, because it spurred, like, what was interesting is that in the epistemology class we're going over coherentism and foundations, so it related. Then, David, how did the blind sight come up? Okay, so let's talk about beliefs in general. Let me just make sure I'm not missing any other super chats. This cup-o belief, right in the chat. Cup-o belief is fantastic. Cup-o belief. The propositional content of this coffee is amazing. Next week, when we drink cup-o belief, okay, so in philosophy, there's two different categories of belief. Occurrent, beliefs that I presently call up to my mind, so I'm aware of them. And non-occurrent. Okay. Beliefs that I'm not currently thinking about or aware of. And this brings up an interesting conversation. Well, okay, of non-occurrent beliefs, you can have those that I've thought before. They have been present in my mind, and I've been aware of them. I'm just not currently thinking about it right now. They're not occurring. Then there's dispositional beliefs. Beliefs that not only am I not thinking about, but I don't hold to. I don't have the belief, but I'd be ready to assent to it. That's where there's a disposition. So if you were asked a particular question, it's like, no, I've never believed that. But because of all my other beliefs, I'm disposed to be assent. Then, a more controversial, and it blew my mind when I was in grad school when I first read this from Searle, beliefs that you have, so it's not that you're just disposed to think about, to assent to them, You actually have them, but you've never, ever called them to attention. That's more controversy. It's like, well, how is that possible? Well, suppose it would be possible in what John Searle says, the background, the belief structure itself, that you could still have a belief, right? Why? Because it forms a logical relation, right? Even so, you have it, even though you've never thought of, like, called it up to your mind. Why? Because beliefs are formed by other beliefs, so you wouldn't need to. So think about this example. Suppose I've never thought about Dallas, Texas, being in Texas. That actual proposition belief. And then somebody in a conversation, we're talking about other beliefs that would entail that, said, well, do you believe that Dallas is in Texas? And because I'd been thinking about the other beliefs, I would be like, yes. Now, somebody asks, are you assenting to that? Is it a dispositional belief? And you're like, well, I'm assenting to it. Well, does that mean you never believed it before? That would be harder to say. It'd be like, no, I couldn't say I never believed it before. I just never brought it to my attention. This is almost similar to the Meno, right? That he's asking about all these other beliefs and gets him to call what? That the square on the sides of a right angle triangle, the area of the square of the sides of the triangle equals the area of the square on the hypotenuse. And the whole argument's not going to be like he learned something. It's like he's always had that. So something kind of similar to that. And through that, it sounds very odd too. And there's obviously some pushback. Like, could you have a belief that you've never called to your attention that's current, but you didn't newly form? And it's like, no, I've always believed. It's not something that I didn't believe. I just wasn't aware of it. But because that would only follow, right? So notice this doesn't work for Wood's linear structure of inference, because you'd have to move from each one to, as he said, rehearse to get to a. They'd be like, no, but if it exists in the background, right? It's in there, regardless of whether you're ever pulled it to your attention, because of the structure of how inference works. Non-linearly, but holistically. That's true. That actually follows. And that got me to thinking about, all right. So let's talk about awareness and things that you aren't aware of. Could you have mental states that you've always had or operating that you're not aware of? Now, I don't like to use subconscious. John Searle has a whole argument not to use. He calls it background. Because they can be called to it, like you're talking about and you're aware of the things that you're talking about. It doesn't make sense to say like subconscious or unconscious. And you want to move away from Freudian kind of talk, is I think what Searle is saying. All right. So this got me to think about blind sight patients. How many of you have heard of their brain injuries to the visual cortex that causes some interesting problems in various degrees in various areas? So not everybody, it's more rare that somebody's actually blind when they get blind sight, but there are cases of that. However, obviously people who are blind doesn't mean they have blind sight. Okay, make that. It's a specific injury that causes something specific. A specific problem. Okay? No, I don't think the problem talk of consciousness is problematic. I think Freudian language of subconscious, unconscious, is problematic. Talk about consciousness is awesome. Like, exactly. I have no problem with that. I have a problem with Freudianism. Yeah, and the mosaic analogy is really good too, because you wouldn't say like, so you didn't see that? I'd be like, well, I mean, it was there in my visual experience, like vaguely, I guess. Like when you see somebody out of your peripheral or something like that, it's just like I just wasn't paying that close attention to it. Now I'm zooming in on. All right, a blind sight patient. No, I would not say consciousness is what, or conscience, the moral aspect, unites mind and body. Would never make that argument. No offense, but. And the reason why is that consciousness is not a. I need something more than, because consciousness is defined as not being a product of the body, right? Um, what I say unites is something, some type of hylomorphic, right? Where I have some type of metaphysical account that doesn't um, create dialectics of opposition between the two categories. That's what unites, is a metaphysical theory, something like all right. Spirit is ambiguous. I wouldn't use that too. Spirit can refer. Um, and again, you can't use these terms outside of the paradigm in which what spirit means in one system is totally different. So you can't just be like, well, spirit unite. Spirit can either mean soul. The problem is, in other cases, it's not. Because St. Paul talks about soul and spirit. He obviously doesn't mean, he's not being soul and soul, right? In that sense, it refers to the moral and spiritual noetic aspect of one's heart, and specifically the further distinction is like, even though everybody has that, there's a further distinction in which people don't have that. Non-baptized Orthodox have not received what? The seal of the Holy Spirit, the life of. So in that sense, that's not even that's not even the category of mind or body. It's talking about the incarnational structure of being grafted into the body of Christ. So yeah, I don't think that's helpful to use those and say that's not what unites. Furthermore, when we say body, soul, and spirit, it's not like a third thing. So in one sense, spirit is a faculty of not of the body. It's a property of the nous and the mind and stuff like that, and the rational soul and stuff. So yeah, I just don't think it's helpful to. All right, moving on. Blind sight studies. No, I know. I'm not giving. I'm not upset or anything like that. I'm just saying I don't think. There's not going to be any word that actually, or thing that unites. It's a holistic picture that, and it's a radically different way. Rejecting the kind of modern assumptions of either Cartesian or materialist view of anthropology, that's going to be something close to like a hylomorphic account is the best, and that requires a lot of details. And all right, blind sight is people that can't, they're unaware in their conscious experience of certain things. Yet they their mind's able to pick up on it and discriminate, react to, and actually formulate a belief that's actually correct about the things they totally can't see. Those could be colors, it could be shapes, numbers, obstacles. So, like if I had this Kleenex, right? And there could be a blind sight patient that had damage to their visual cortex. I'm like, do you see any colors? So the best way is self-report of like, I'm obviously aware of what I'm aware of. To be like, no. And that's not the same, it's not exactly the same as color blindness. So maybe they see shapes or something like that. I mean, it's somewhat similar to, I guess, color blindness, the inability to distinguish, but this person doesn't see, let's say, in this example, doesn't see any colors. And then they're like, oh, okay, well, guess. So you're not aware, you can't see, you're not having a sense experience of colors. And so they're like, well, I can't tell you because I can't see it. I'm not aware of any colors. Well, just guess. They guess, and they get such a high percentage right, like 85, 90, that clearly it's not guessing. So statistically, we know that if somebody always gets, so there's a margin of error in there of, 10, 15%. But if they're constantly getting that number, it means they're not guessing. It means their mind actually is picking up on the colors that they're unaware of. Like, how is that possible? It could be shapes, too. I don't see any shapes. Well, just guess what shapes are on there. Square, circle, well, where? And just guess. I don't know, in the middle. And it's like, get it right. Then the most extreme is somebody that's actually blind from blind sight. So again, the far majority of blind people do not have blind sight. It's the other way around. Somebody who has blind sight could be so much damage that they're actually blind. And you put a bunch of obstacles in the room, they can't see it because they're totally blind. So they're not just blind to a particular color, shape, or number. They can't see anything. If you can't see anything, you're not aware of the things that you can't see. And they tell the person, okay, there's nothing in the room, so don't worry about, we just need you to walk a straight line. Unbeknownst to them, there's obstacles put in the way, boxes and chairs, in which they can't walk a straight line. Guess what they do? They walk around all the obstacles, and then what's even crazier, they asked, now, did you walk the straight line? And they say, yes. How is that possible? And this brought up conversations about, well, first of all, it's possible that the mind actually can actually interact with sense content without being aware of it. And accurately, we always thought, like, well, you can't obviously know or talk about something that you've never experienced when it's an experiential object. It's like, well, actually, these are the cases you can. And this brought up conversations about perhaps even action, let alone a new belief formed, is because of a whole host of background beliefs that they actually have. That's a possible theory and that would be another case and point proving that you could formulate a new belief from beliefs that I've never ever been aware of, let alone, not being aware of what you're actually sensing. That's how actually that came up. And by the way, this came up another thing that my wife was always asking me, because I remember when I came home, I think once from when I first heard this, and I shared it with her, and both of us were like, what does that even mean? There is a story that can be disputed, that the natives here in Americas, when the Spanish were coming up in ships, just think of like Apocalypto when they're coming up. But unlike the Apocalyptic where they saw it, they didn't see it. Okay, the first thing, this is the story, is that they didn't see any ships. And then somebody was to go, oh, they didn't know what they were seeing. I was like, that wasn't the claim. They said they didn't see it. I know what it means to say, I'm seeing something, I don't know what it is, because I don't have a concept to... The claim is they don't even see it. Okay. Think about an example of something where somebody tells you something. There's something behind this computer. You're not seeing it. Okay? So it's not only do you not know what it is, you're not seeing it. The difference with this is it was in front of their visual field, and they didn't see it the same way that if it was behind your visual field. The visual data is hitting their eyes, is what I'm saying. And they weren't going, I'm confused. Is that a cloud? They weren't doing that. They didn't see it. It's called perceptual blindness. I'm going to give you an example from Gestaltian psychology. Okay? How this works. You're so conditioned to thinking that I'm seeing something, I just don't know what it is, that you cannot conceive of a thing that you could actually hit your visual field and your senses and you actually don't see it even. So it's not that you're confused about what it is, it's blindness. Just like this. When you ask, what does that mean? Just like blind sight. Okay? There's something hitting their sense organs. They don't see it. They don't see the shapes. If there were numbers on here and somebody had, they wouldn't see numbers. But it's actually in their visual field. And it's hitting their sense organs. They're just not seeing it. How crazy is that? So all the visual data comes in, it's hitting their eyes, it's going through their sense organs and stuff like that, and they don't see it. Something similar to this. Should I make this bigger? No, I hate it when that happens. Sense data. So the data of the sense, I don't want to say sense data because that's something else, is coming in. It's actually hitting. Okay. So You see a young lady. Okay. So this would it's not a perfect analogy. Many of you are not going to see the old lady, but the old lady's there. And it's not that, well, I just don't know what I'm looking at. You're not actually seeing the old lady. So they saw clouds and a sea and stuff like that. They didn't mistake the ships as a cloud. The argument is there was no ship, even though there was a ship. They did not see a ship. They didn't see the ship as a... So the question isn't, did they see the ship as a cloud or did they see the ship as water? No, they did not. They were blind, perceptually blind. The ship was there. It was hitting their sense organs, just like the old lady is right here, and you don't see it. Now, this is... Unfortunately, the analogy doesn't perfectly work with this, but there's something similar going on because you're actually seeing the lady. So I guess... so you're seeing the old lady as a young lady. So it doesn't quite fit for the analogy because they're not seeing the ship as a cloud. They're not seeing the ship. And the ship is actually there, hitting their sense organs. The data's coming in. Just like blind... Now, what's interesting, Crispy, what I found out too, I can see both. I can't see both at once. I have to switch. It may happen really fast, but you will not. This is one thing I learned from that experiment. You can't see both the young lady and the old lady at the exact same time. You have to switch to another concept, which is what Seller says. You see it as... Isn't that cool? All right, questions. No more super chats? Yeah, if you sever the... Yeah, there's a bunch of interesting stuff that happens when you have brain injuries or sever the... I don't know in Listed Logos if there's an ethical component that causes you... capacity to perceive. I don't know how you would test that either. We can test brain injuries and be like, well, now we can... could this be what happens some on DMT? Perceptual blindness? I don't think so. Well, vision is a conscious state. Like, vision doesn't exist outside of you. Vision is about what's outside, but it doesn't exist outside. So it's a property of consciousness and mind. And it does seem to be projected in the sense that, no pun intended, the sense. It's a framework to see, right? So there is no sight out there. Now, it doesn't mean that it's a complete projection, right? There is something actually out there, and the idea is that again, the concepts and the beliefs conform, at least as we saw here, generally to what's out there, such that it captures. So what I want to argue is that it's not like a Humean world of what's called a sense manifold, that it's just a bunch of like unconnected particles, and that our mind just projects this. I'm a real essentialist, so I'm like, no, there's actual trees out there that are an immaterial form that forms the matter. Same with like of animals and houses and people and stuff like that. And so this is why Aristotle has a good. There's a passive mind to receive that in the conscious experience, and then also there's an active mind that provides a structure. It does something with the forms, the reality that's actually out there. And the merging of these two is what gives you accurate and correct beliefs. So I don't want to say just like it's all a projection, but like, no, there's a real reality of trees and stuff that you can actually encounter and experience. And again, there are cases when like the qualitative thing that I'm experiencing is not actually in the thing itself, but that doesn't mean all of my ideas, there's not a thing in itself like out there. Yeah, I get it. I eat an habanero and I get the quality of like 300 degrees Fahrenheit in my mouth. It's like there's no 330 degrees. Like I allow for that. Or the qualitative experience of color of red or something is, there's no, I don't think we would say like the qualitativeness, the way I experience red is actually in the thing itself. But I do want to maintain that, no, there's actual real forms and essences out there which you can have a mental grasp of as the thing itself. Does that make sense? So seeing is in the mind. It is an active process, if that's what you mean by objecting. It doesn't exist in the thing. But the thing that you're seeing, and oftentimes the way that you see it, is actually the way that it is. That's what I want to say. Not always, but it's not a mere projection in all cases. It's an act. It's an action and a making. This is what Aristotle calls nous poietikos. In Greek, it's maker mind. It's actively right arranging, and the sight does become a projection on that, but it doesn't follow that what I'm seeing is not the way that it actually really is. That's what I want to say. Even despite the examples of things that I do see that aren't the way that they are, it doesn't follow that therefore, well, all scenes are not seen the way the thing really is in itself. That I disagree with. And yes, all senses, I do believe that. All senses are a species of touch. You can't actually see something without light through the medium actually touching your eyes. And then you need a medium, Aristotle says too. It's called the transparent, right? The air, right? So it's not color. Because he says color is the proper object of sight. So in some sense, color can be in the object. Okay, but I can't see it unless there's a medium in which the color travels through. So I don't see the color in the medium because the medium is the means by which the color is transferred to my eyes. And then he has this thing, I think it's in De Anima, that if I have the color, if there's not a medium, and I put the color on my eye, I don't see it. Isn't that interesting? And then what's really interesting is what activates color is in the medium to make sight possible is light, energeia. Isn't that crazy? And then every other species of sensation is like sound is obviously sound waves hitting touch, odor, smell, like stuff like that. So yeah, De Anima's an awesome book to read on. Yes, forms. The Aristotelian account of forms. I think we'd modify it too because Aristotle, we're like a mean proportion between Aristotle and Plato. So Aristotle doesn't believe there are any out there universals, but he doesn't believe that universals are subjective. They're invariant. They'll be eternal, but the mind creates them from individual particular forms. I don't believe that. We believe that universals, there is a noetic realm that's created in which God creates universals, which would be the class of all those particular forms. And then the forms are created from John Kell, 1999. God bless, thank you so much. The forms have their being and existence in virtue of the transcendent created universals, which are ultimately grounded in the uncreated and sustained through God's uncreated logoi. So, however, so imagine there's a connection. There is an actual individual immaterial form in that tree, a living form, right? It's not material. It's what is encoded in all the DNA. It's the information, get it? Where the word form, I'm not making this stuff up, that guides and develops all the parts. So, such that Aristotle says it's not a mere heap, it's an organic unity. It's a substance. That's why we say in chemistry there's a difference between substantial change and mixtures. I add NaCl, salt, sodium chloride, to water, I don't get a substantial change. Right? It's called a mixture. Why? Because they're just parts together. They're not substantially unified. However, if I take two hydrogens and an oxygen molecule that are substance, and I put them together, I don't get a mixture. I get a substantial. Well, what's pulling them together into a substantial unity? Form. It's a new form, new substance. So there's something in the trees, in living matter that's actually immaterial. That's a form that unifies all the parts, just like we were talking about the chemistry of substantial changes, that guides its development, its information. Okay. And when I experience through my senses, because it's encoded in all the matter, just like the DNA, it goes through my senses into my immaterial mind. And notice the mean proportion there. I have a material body, and there's a material object, but it's when it's encoded, right? My mind is in my soul, my rational soul, in every part of my material body, right? Forming it, that, right, the immaterial form can come into and rest in the mind, and then the mind actively makes that what? A universal. Not because the mind creates it, but it connects it to the thing that grounds its being. And it happens through touch. Every sense. That's would be our account, kind of mixing the Aristotelian and Platonic. Well, DNA does not contain the information necessary to produce morphology. Well, what do you mean about that? I'm not getting. And I'm not equating immaterial forms exactly with DNA. I'm saying DNA reveals information, i.e. the form, but it can't be reduced simply to DNA. Yeah, there are real shapes out there. There's actually real contours. Like, that's not just a projection of the mind. But the mind, if it didn't have an, like Aristotle says, if you just have a passive mind, the mind doesn't actually make stuff according to concepts and does stuff with the form. You don't actually know anything. You have a potential thing to be known and a potential mind, passive mind, and two passivities or potentialities doesn't give you an actuality. I'm about to get going pretty soon. Good question. I wrote my PhD dissertation on all of this. That's why. No, I would say DNA does contain the form. Because why? Form is in every aspect of the material bodies. So again, are you getting the point? Form is not equivalent with DNA. Form is in DNA. Form is in every single cell. It's in every part of the body. Right? So I can't just simply look at a cell and be like, that's where the form's in the entirety of it, right? So what DNA is, it gives us information about the form, but it's encoded in every part. That's what I proved in my thesis. Because it's a hylomorphic account, and its form, because DNA itself can't explain the whole, right? DNA cannot explain itself. It means the form must be in the DNA, just as in every single part. That's what we mean by ensouled, right? Anima, right? It's not just simply the form or the souls in the mind or in the pineal gland or something like. It's encoded in every single part. And so look up what hylomorphism. I think you're kind of confused on. It'll give you a better way to understand DNA. Well, I mean, cells are transmitters of the form. Again, the form is possessed in full in every single part. So the whole is in every part, but cannot be reduced to any one part. But that information of the soul, the form, is in every single, and it is that, not any one part that accounts for the whole, it's the whole that accounts for the part, and the whole is in every single part. It's called an alternative explanation of mind and nature. Lessons from John Cyril and Bernard Lonergan. It's on the... All right, I gotta go. That is all, folks. Thank you so much, everybody, for the super chats. Thank you for a wonderful conversation. May God bless you and keep you. Until next time, bye-bye.